I'll answer the question. You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and it's just one of these topics that won't seem to go away. Ever since the firing of Dan DiDio, there's just a general belief that DC Comics is on the verge of collapse. You know, I talked about it on the Comics Aficionados this weekend. You know, Perch was one of the members of that panel. I think we had a good discussion, but I think it's better that we get a more compressed story right here so people can get all the facts that we have as we know them, Perch, and talk about it. How are you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing great. Hope you're doing well, and we're hanging in here as the comic industry is on the verge of collapse.
So there's been a bunch of articles. We're going to talk about them all in a bit, but just last week there was another article from a website called Motley Fool. It's an investment website. It was from a writer by the name of Leo Sun. I went through his portfolio. He doesn't really cover comics all that much. I see a lot of articles about, you know, Baidu, which talking about maybe some like Chinese social media stuff. He's talking about, you know, how to become a millionaire through your investments. A wide variety of things, including Nintendo and Sony. So there's some pop culture coverage in there as well. But he's certainly not someone that's grounded in comic books and comic book culture. So I thought it was interesting that there's a new set of eyes on this from an outside perspective, purely looking at the numbers.
It was great. It was a great article.
And before we get on that, I just want to cover the bottom three paragraphs, which is what we in the military call bottom line up front. This is what he had to say. Elliott Management's moves and the dismissal of Dan DiDio sparked wild rumors, but a sale or licensing deal would arguably weaken AT&T's DC business without significantly reducing its massive long-term debt of $151 billion. Recent reports also suggest that DiDio was fired due to creative conflicts instead of financial ones. DiDio reportedly clashed with writers over his micromanagement of storylines, and his planned 5G reboot for the DC universe likely exacerbated those conflicts. Therefore, it's doubtful that AT&T will sell off or kill DC Comics anytime soon. DC won't significantly boost WarnerMedia's revenues, but its comic book storylines could still provide valuable fodder for future TV and film projects at WarnerMedia.
Yep. I've heard that before somewhere. It feels like that story's been said before. It's a good summary, and it is. Keep in mind, Motley Fool is an investment website. You're not going to see articles that say it will never happen, or this won't happen, or it is a 100% lock. I mean, as an investment website, they have to basically run analysis, and that's what they've done here. And basically, it's confirming the same thing you've been hearing on this channel. Same thing Wes and I have been saying for some time of, the DiDio firing is not the herald to the end times, and that AT&T values DC for things that, certainly go way beyond a 5G storyline.
Yeah, within there, he gets into some hard numbers, which I think are really important. You know, outside of TV and movie revenue, Warner Brothers generates $2 billion a year from DC. Not including movies and TV. And within that, basically, if we extrapolate the sales numbers for the year and DC's market share, DC Comics generates about $300 million in revenue in total. So the comics division, even within the stuff outside of TV and movies, is very minuscule. And within all of AT&T's revenues in a year represents like 0.2% for the entire company. So it's a percentage of 1%. It's a fraction of a percent.
Right. And that's an important fact to know because on two fronts. Number one, it's a very small part of their overall revenues, you just heard. So therefore, if you get into these kind of comments like, well, AT&T needs to burn down their debt, or AT&T needs to hey, this current financial turmoil is going to cause them to shed things to take back some of their money. They're getting it would basically cover operating expenses for like 2 days, maybe, if they got full market value for that acquisition, which you wouldn't in these times anyway. So it's insignificant in terms of raising cash or working down their debt. It's not going to matter. On the other end, it's called an upside investment, which means that even though it's not bringing in a lot of money, it's also not costing them much either. But the value of the money they are spending, the potential of that investment is quite high, either through, as we just mentioned, licensing deals. You just look where the money sits, or media or film projects or anything else. It's a very safe, comfortable bet for a company like this to have right now. And again, we've talked about this before too. If AT&T decided, hey, we want to get out of the entertainment business, we want to do a complete 180-degree pivot from everything we told the investors over the last 5 years, we're going to shed that and go back to just selling phones and having phones, stores that sell phones. That's all we're going to do. Then it's basically, first of all, it would destroy all the management at AT&T. It would be a complete disaster for them in terms of just everything they promised shareholders and all the rest. And then they would be handing a weapon to a known competitor, if not Disney, somebody else. There's no way a company would do that.
Yeah, the benefit to cost ratio is astronomical, because even though the comic books, which keep the characters fresh and keep new storylines churning out, which you can do at volume because comic book overhead cost is minuscule compared to TV production and movie production. So you can keep stories going out without having to spend a lot of money. You can see what catches fire and what people like. It's 300 million, revenues annually, but the money generated just on licensing and some other deals like video games and whatnot, $2 billion.
No, exactly. I mean, it's complete upside. And people have said in the comments and other places, well, that doesn't mean DC will keep publishing open. That doesn't mean DC will keep doing comics. They could just license this stuff out. They could, but again, they're spending almost nothing to get there. The comics division costs them very, very little. And the opportunity to come up with a punchline character through the comics that then you can put on t-shirts and throw into a movie and other things, it's worth the investment. You can talk to, I know Brett Smith has made this point in the past, many others. There is not a more powerful, testing of IP right now that AT&T has at cost for the benefit they get in return. It's a complete no-brainer. So if they stop publishing the comics, yeah, they would save a few dollars, but literally a few dollars, and they would be cutting off any opportunity for kind of new characters. They'd be basically locking in and saying, the characters that we have, the Batman, Superman, Green Lantern, Flash, that's what we're going to live with forever until this whole business dies away. That makes no sense.
Also, when you look at the comic book publishing landscape, if they were to license out, you would assume that they're going to license it out to a competitor. Well, they're not going to do it to Marvel.
Right.
The next biggest comic book publisher is Image. Their business model and their structure do not fit that. They do not seem like a company that would necessarily or even willingly take on DC's publishing line, which right now is about 80 new comics a month.
Right.
Next, number 4, IDW, on the verge of collapse, most likely due to an enormous amount of debt compared to their actual revenues. So then you're down to like Dark Horse and Boom, who are putting out, in between like 12 and 20 comics a month. So now they're all of a sudden going to scale up and do 400% more production in a month. Where do they have the resource to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't happen. So, I mean, that's very well said. If you're Dark Horse, for example, and you're suddenly, you were handed the DC license, you got lucky and DC said, we're stopping publishing comics, you're going to do it for us. Dark Horse would have to scale up operations. How would they do that? First of all, they need a major cash influx in order to just handle this stuff coming in. What's peanuts to AT&T would be a very significant amount of money Dark Horse would have to raise. And who's going to give Dark Horse that money? Nobody. For this business. I mean, basically your business proposition is, hey, why don't you take arguably the least valuable part of this comic business? You're still going to have oversight from another group. By the way, we can see how that worked out for IDW, and you don't have the media upside that IDW has. So it's a worse proposition for you. Nobody's going to loan money in those conditions, and raising that would be incredibly difficult. And beyond that, AT&T would want assurances that the publishing department is not going to just collapse in and of itself. I mean, now you're going to taint their whole brand by handing it off to somebody else who won't be able to take care of it. That's not a good option either. So, and once again, AT&T doesn't need the money. If they hand it off to somebody else to license, for what? For how many $1 million a year would AT&T want to make off that? arguably they could generate the same revenue by closing 10 stores. The math doesn't add up.
Also, when you look at, we'll take Dark Horse as an example. Their two biggest writers, in my opinion, are Jeff Lemire and Mike Mignola. Are they going to take them off of their Black Hammer and Hellboy universes to go write for DC, which they won't have any film or TV distribution rights for, and they're going to have a huge chunk of the revenues siphoned off and go back to DC anyway? Or do they want to focus on the stuff that they have, some skin in the game where they can get the most bang for their buck if something does hit?
No, exactly. No creator who's in the current indie world, or an Image for that matter, will want to go for that deal. It's not a good deal for them. It would, take money out of their pocket long term. That's how the creator would look at it. They would have, editorial oversight from a DC from an AT&T or from whoever's managing that licensing brand. Is the whole reason they got into indies in the first place. So their option then would be to go to kind of no-name talents and try and build that business up as well, which again, that's more investment, more time, finding these people out of nowhere. It stretches belief beyond the breaking point.
Okay, so now that we've kind of covered what came out of the Motley Fool article, which confirms a lot of what we've been saying, but he had some other facts in a different perspective. We've kind of covered why we don't think this is actually imminent. Of course, it could happen, but let's see, kind of where it came from. There are a lot of articles that I've found where it says, AT&T are going to shut down DC Comics if 5G hits. Every one of them that I can see that actually that has a source for the information, it's Ethan Van Sciver on his Comic Artist Pro Secrets website on his Comics Artist Pro Secrets YouTube channel, where he did a live stream and he talked about talking to a DC insider right after Dan DiDio's firing, which I do not dispute that. I think he probably did talk to one of his sources at DC Comics. They likely said exactly what he did. But you were at Comics Pro exactly when that happened. You talked to multiple people from DC Comics and within the industry. Were they all on the same page, or were they all hearing different ideas of what was going to happen after Dan DiDio was fired?
No, they were hearing different ideas, and I think, as we said on your channel, that first night people were depressed and scared, and so they were saying things like, "Oh, is this the end for me? What's going to happen next? Is this the signal that we're about to shut down DC?" There was creative conflicts around 5G. Is this AT&T basically saying, if this stuff doesn't work out, we're all losing a job? I mean, that's fear talk. And in some cases, depressed talk, because your world just got upended. And that's reasonable. None of that's unusual. Anybody who's ever had a tough situation at work, or gotten fired, or had a friend that's gotten fired, or any of that kind of stuff, it's emotional and it's hard, and nobody likes that. That was what people were saying. But as we've said, the next day, more data is coming in. People are kind of recalibrating, getting back to themselves. Ethan's comments. I mean, Ethan was a very big creative name at DC. He worked on their comics. He worked on some of the bigger comics that DC had. So of course, people are going to look to him and say that's a really plugged in source, without necessarily taking context. First of all, where he said it, kind of his immediate reaction to Didio's firing, the fact that he doesn't work for DC right now, which a bunch of articles have kind of forgotten. They were citing it as a current member within the company. It's a thrilling, catching kind of headline, but it misses the fact that this was something maybe more kind of as a reaction, or emotionally said, or a prediction, as opposed to actual insider knowledge of what was for sure going to happen.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying I think Ethan Van Sciver's full of shit. I think that he likely did hear that from somebody that he has that's within DC Comics, but it was an emotional, reactive response to a big firing that no one saw coming, or mostly nobody saw coming.
No, absolutely. I mean, and yes, and if we're judging it by that matter, we can say I'm full of shit too, because I heard the exact same thing from people who were scared. And on top of that, again, I mean, Ethan, there's some friends of his, I'm sure, within the industry that he's reacting to as well. So there's emotion all around. And I think he's walked back some of those comments to some extent in the weeks later, not saying no, it wasn't true, just giving more context that a lot of these articles have neglected to add.
Okay, so we talked about kind of the source for the DC, or AT&T is selling DC if 5G fails. Now there's another set of articles DC or AT&T is going to sell DC to Marvel Comics, their competitor. Now, this one has no sources.
Yeah.
All the sources are the same article, and in that article, there is no source. It's just wild speculation. There's literally that information came from nowhere inside the comic industry or inside the company. Nobody at Marvel, nobody at DC, nobody that was familiar with the situation. It was wild speculation.
Yeah, if you go back to the early 90s, meaning pre-Image, there's always a rumor that either Marvel's going to sell to DC or DC is going to sell to Marvel. Those rumors have been in the comic industry forever, and you're right. There's no source to this one. The Cosmic Book News, which wrote an article on this, is the same one that was saying for sure last year in 2019 Marvel Comics was going to be closed. So I mean, these are fantasy ideas. They have no basis in speculation, as we've covered before. I think that, frankly, I think AT&T would just let the entire business die, close it down before handing it over to Disney. Disney is a competitor to theirs. There's no way they're going to just hand them that property. Unless, of course, Disney offered some absurd amount of money for it, which Disney is not going to do. It's not going to happen. And we're going to see this. I can make this bold prediction that before the end of the year, we will see articles and we will see people talking about Disney selling Marvel. I think if Black Widow underperforms, those articles will immediately spin up. And, with current people being scared to go into theaters, it likely will underperform. Just like Onward has underperformed, and there's a couple articles out there that talk about, is Pixar about to die? It's like these are reaction, outrage, clickbait articles.
All right. So with that one, Jim Lee was at C2E2, and he actually addressed it. And he said, and I quote, "To address some of the stuff that is out there, there's rumors, speculation. I wouldn't put any credence into it. DC has been around for 85 years, and we'll be around for another 85 years. I hope to be doing this panel in 85 years. Obviously, he's not going to be doing the panel in 85 years. Nobody lives that long. But he even addressed it, and he's like, I don't know where it's coming from. It's not coming from anywhere.
Yeah, it's funny. I think, and it's one of those reactions people have right now, which is they view this stuff, especially somebody like Jim Lee, who's not plugged into all this, is ludicrous. So their reaction is almost flippant because it's silly on its surface. And some people take that kind of flippant response as, oh, he's hiding something. See, he's not taking it seriously. It's like, no, he's just not taking it seriously because it's not a serious topic.
And now, with the current climate within the world right now, we're having some financial fluctuations. A lot of people are losing some investments. Stock prices are down. And now I'm seeing, somewhere in my comments, I'm seeing a little bit, on social media that, due to declining stock prices, AT&T is going to be forced to sell DC because of the stock market.
Again, it would help them. It's so little of their business. It would help them for a day. I mean, it wouldn't even matter. And again, if you're a longtime comics fan, it probably hurts and stings a little bit to hear something like DC Comics doesn't matter to the bigger picture. You don't want to hear that. As a fan, I don't want to hear that. But it is a number reality. It is, and some people say, well, every little bit counts. Yeah, not really. Not to a mega corporation like this. This is
0.2% is.
It doesn't count. It just doesn't matter. I would argue that probably AT&T's marketing budget for just their brick and mortar stores alone exceeds a lot of what DC costs them. I mean, it just does not matter. And so if the argument here is they're going to have to shed DC to save cash, forget it.
And I don't want viewers to think that we're not taking you seriously, or we think people are rubes that they believe this stuff. It's coming from what seem like credible sources. You're seeing it from multiple websites. Just realize it's all coming from one source. Or in the case of the AT&T or Marvel acquiring DC, it's not actually coming from a source. That was just speculation. So you gotta realize, when I was in intelligence and we would maybe want to detain somebody and talk to them when I was downrange, I would have a piece of paper that said, I think this happened. Well, that was not enough to do it. So I needed something else to corroborate that, so we could actually go talk to him. And I would call over to another base and I would say, do you have any information on this individual? We would like to talk to him, but I need another piece of information. You know what would happen? In 3 days, I would get a call from somebody I'd never heard of and they would basically tell me what I needed to hear about that person. But then I would eventually figure out I was the source of the information.
Yeah.
But it had been passed around 5 different people and actually come back to me because finally he wanted to ask me if I had information, and he didn't even realize he was talking to the person that needed it to begin with. It's called circular reporting. You need to realize there should be multiple sources, and they should be within the company.
Absolutely. No, that's well said, and I think it's. I like what you said there too about people who are feeding into this and seeing it. You don't feel dumb, and certainly I hope nobody thinks that we're making fun of you. We're not. We're trying to bring clarity to the situation and give at least our side of things. But all this stuff. I mean, there's a lot of noise out there and a lot of information. It's hard to cut through it all. And like I said, there's a difference between dealing with something with emotion or dealing with something that is a speculative idea versus a real story and a real problem, and getting multiple sources, getting sources in the company is critical to actually finding the truth.
Yeah, so Perch and I, we are fully aware that there are major issues within the industry. We try to cover it, on a weekly, monthly basis when we see things that need to be addressed or need to be tackled or maybe need to be illuminated as why this is an issue or how it could become a problem in the future. It's absolutely one of the things that we love doing. But, I think this puts a cap on what I'm going to talk about this. DC is collapsing. DC or AT&T is selling off. AT&T is going to sell to Marvel. Right now, there's no fire to that smoke. Yes, there's a lot of speculation, but I don't see it.
No, absolutely. It's just not. Now's not the time. Now's not where it's going to happen. We need some different data to come out before that even becomes a possibility.
All right, Perch. I really appreciate you coming on the channel and helping me, spell this out. Did you have one last thing you wanted to say before I let you go?
Yeah, no, just keep everybody keep your heads. Enjoy comics you enjoy, and don't worry so much about the various machinations of a giant corporation. That stuff's going to happen whether we like it or not. And the best thing we can do is enjoy what our comics and enjoy what we can enjoy, and not worry so much about those.
Well said, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.